Shut up and sit down.
Let's talk about Adrian Newey and his next position. When Adrian Newey leaves Red Bull Racing at the end of this year or whatever, he's going to have to go on gardening leave, which is the British's very nice term for he has to comply with a no-compete contract. So he won't be able to work in the sport for a designated period of time. It's probably a year. Here in the United States, if you sign a no-compete contract, those contracts can be enforceable. Sometimes they cannot be. But depending on the state, they can't keep you from making a living. So sometimes no-compete contracts are not enforceable. It doesn't mean that Adrian Newey can't design race cars. It just means that he can't go work for another Formula One team and design their race car while he is on gardening leave. So let's look back at Adrian Newey's career and let's see where he might end up going. Because Adrian's first career in 1984, he worked for March Automobiles. March was a small manufacturer of Formula race cars out of England. He took that expertise, and his very first championship car was he designed a GTP car for IMSA, and he won a championship there. Then in 1984, he moved to the INDYCAR series. Now, he got out of school in, I got an 84, he's 2 years young, like an 81, 82. So as an aerodynamicist, he has a degree in aeronautics from Southampton, I believe. So, smart guy. So he moves to INDYCAR, or that was CART at the time, Championship Auto Racing Teams. And he went there and he worked for True Sports, which was Jim Truman in Bobby Rahal. And out of Ohio, True Sports, Truman owned Red Roof Inns. That's how he made his fortune, which was a value-priced hotel chain in the USA, not unlike Motel 6 or whatever, okay? But he was a big fan of racing, so they hired Adrian Newey and bought a March race cars, for Bobby Rahal to race. And Bobby Rahal was a future Indy 500 winner at this point, and Adrian Newey was designing race cars for them. CART, Championship Auto Racing Teams, at the time was probably the U.S.'s equivalent of Formula One in that the rules were very open. You could do a lot to the car. They had ground effects when Formula One cars had ground effects, for instance. They had extremely interesting rules. And CART, one of the downfalls of CART, if you look at the history, was that the cars became so expensive that it was hard for teams to compete. Unlike Formula One, which basically had unlimited budgets, CART teams had to rely on sponsorship, and a lot of people built their own chassis, but nonetheless, the cost was just geometrically progressing. So that's why CART evolved into the Indy Racing League, which is what INDYCAR is now, which is kind of almost a spec league with a single Dallara chassis that is run, although it is upgraded, obviously. So Newey, again, worked for Jim Truman and Bobby Rahal. Okay, the March 85C, which he designed, won the 1985 CART Championship, and that was without Unser Sr., okay? Or it might have been Junior. But he was, so it was, I get them both confused. I think it was Junior. He won the 85 CART Championship, okay? Now, in 1985, Danny Sullivan also drove an Adrian Newey car, okay? And Danny Sullivan is known for the great spin-to-win Indy 500 win of 1985. He was going into turn one. He spun the car exactly 360 degrees, kept it on the gas, went on to win that race. It was an unbelievable win for him. And then the next year in the March 86C, again, March 86C, he won Newey's car with Bobby Rahal driving won the Indy 500. Now, in 1986, he moved over to Haas, Carl Haas, and Haas Motorsports. And Haas was the Lola, another automobile manufacturer out of Britain. And he was designing Lola chassis for Lola and Carl Haas, again in the INDYCAR ranks. One of the other things Lola Cars is known for is back in 79 or 80 when Michael Andretti started racing automobiles. I can remember because I was at the same race in Palm Beach when he rolled up with Carl Haas, not Gene Haas, but Carl Haas. And Carl Haas came in with 3 T540 Lolas sitting in a 53-foot trailer, tractor trailer. When we all got motorhomes, he's got a tractor trailer. And out rolls Michael Andretti. He raced that weekend with us and John Paul Jr., who became later a Indy 500 Rookie of the Year. And those two guys, just because they had unlimited funds, I've said this before, they basically beat the crap out of us. But they also had tons of money, and they didn't have to worry if they wrecked the car. So Carl Haas was Michael Andretti's first owner. Haas, if you remember, maybe Newman Haas Racing, that was Carl Haas, not Gene Haas of Stewart Haas Racing. Gene Haas is the owner of Haas Formula One team. 2 different Haas guys, just so you know, both very famous race guys. Okay, so in 1988, after that, by the way, Haas won 11 championships, so he knew what he was doing in motor racing. He won in NASCAR, he won in INDYCAR, he won in kart, he won in Indy Racing League, he won in GT cars and IMSA. He was a well-rounded team owner. So Adrian Newey goes back in 1988 and went back to Formula One, okay, and then he worked for McLaren and a few minor teams, then McLaren, and then he goes to Red Bull in 2005. So he's been there for 20 years, 20 seasons with Red Bull, and he's leaving. So with his knowledge, his aerodynamic knowledge, he's a genius, let's face it. Where's he going to go? So rumors are starting that he might come back to the Indy Racing League. The Indy Racing League is in need of a new car. They need a new spec. They need some new rules. And who better for Roger Penske to hire to oversee a brand new spec car than the greatest aerodynamicist of our era, Adrian Newey. Imagine the prestige IndyCar racing. It gives him a big bump up. It will bring massive amounts of exposure, at least within the racing community, which can no doubt bring massive exposure outside of the racing community, which means an infusion of more bucks, more sponsorships, higher end sponsorships. If you watch the Indy 500 coming up in 10 days, you will see 5 Hour Energy on drinks, 5 Hour Energy, a lot of national brands, obviously, will be sponsors. But I can remember when the Indy Racing League, one year, they had 35 cars start, which was interesting, and they had, everything was a .com, because the .com revolution of the late 80s, everybody had furniture.com, pets.com, all these .coms that, were fly-by-night, flash in the pans, everybody trying to get a little bit of traction there, a little LAN grab, if you will, by getting some exposure to the Indy 500. Expensive, but, these guys were burning money. So, $1 million, $2 million to sponsor an IndyCar to see if you could get that tiny little bit of internet back then was super important. So, Adrian Newey, going back to IndyCar, works for Penske. Zach Brown, who owns McLaren Indy and also, or is CEO of McLaren Indy, McLaren Racing, and Formula One, probably wouldn't have a problem with it. Adrian Newey, on his guarding, he's not violating any contracts. He designs a new race car for an entirely different league. He could take a year and a half to do that, and then he can go back to Ferrari or Aston Martin or whoever he wants to go. I don't think it's more about money anymore with Adrian Newey, quite frankly. He's got more money than he can probably spend. I think what he wants is time with his family. He wants to have no worries, and he wants to know that when he gets up in the morning, he's got a place to go. And he could design that car right side by side with Dallara, with Penske, right there in Brackley or wherever he wants to live. So those are my thoughts on Adrian Newey going to the INDYCAR. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you want. And as my friends at, by the way, David Land, I'll put his thing up here. I watch his Indy coverage, and I'll put it right here along. It should be scrolling here. David Land, his YouTube channel. Really, really good insight. I was in my last video. I thought I had it on there, and I didn't. So I'll put it there. Shout out to him. He's doing a pretty good job. So do me a favor. Hit that button and subscribe. Like that so you get notified of future videos. And I will talk to you later. Freddie B. Bye-bye.